Good morning. Thank you for being here, and welcome to the third annual Appalachian State Collegiate Recovery Summit. I am Ben Asma, and I work with the Appalachian Collegiate Recovery community within the Department of Wellness and Prevention Services. I'd like to pose a few thoughts as we begin the day. A teacher of mine, Gabor Mate, expresses addiction as a complex psychophysiological process with a few key components. It manifests in any behavior that a person finds temporary pleasure or relief in, and therefore craves, suffers negative consequences from, and has trouble giving up. What might create the issues that warrant such relief? What can lead a person to a place of such despair? Why is this important? There are different theories on what causes the disease of addiction. Commonly found, there is a history of trauma. The study of adverse childhood experiences is focused on various types of abuse, neglect, and other instances of a rough childhood until the age of 18. These are vital years in a person's brain development and how they learn to trust and exist in the world. What we know from that study is that 38.7% of kids have experienced trauma in the past year, and 1 in 10 have experienced 5 or more different forms of trauma in the past year. Sadly, this is clearly a prevalent problem in our world. What this doesn't include are other forms and intersections of trauma and life stress. For example, historical trauma, the multi-generational trauma experienced by a specific cultural, racial, or ethnic group. Nor does it involve the experience of holding other identities, such as gender or sexual orientation, which also experience higher rates of bias, stress, and trauma. Additionally, we are only beginning to understand the impact that technology and social media are having on our youth. And I have to wonder, what is the real outcome from the impact of the global pandemic on our current students and the students who will be joining us in the future? We know there has been increased stress and fear suffered by our world. We have evidence of increased substance use, increased domestic violence and child abuse, and decreased access to resources and support. To be human, a kid, whether they're small, still in the womb, 3 years old, or 18, and to endure these immense adversities, the potential trauma, it can rock their world and their way of thinking, feeling, and processing in it. We see these experiences lead to depression, anxiety, and many other mental and physical illnesses and ailments. And these seem to be good reasons to seek relief. And when this relief is found in the form of addictive behaviors, it may be the only way they've ever learned or knew how to find relief, to feel okay, maybe even feel normal or some sense of control. It makes sense that it persists. They didn't get to make the choices on how they've been treated and how their brain and body had an unfortunate but very normal reaction to an adverse experience or experiences. The responsibility and challenge to overcome or even endure life's hardship is daunting and scary, but it is possible. People who suffer from addictive behaviors need and deserve access to resources and treatment. They need purpose, or the ability to envision and find purpose. They need community and a sense of belonging, and they need to have a safe home. Now these components cannot make up for the past and what likely led to or influenced the addictive behavior, but they are imperative to helping a person find hope and connection and healing in the present and future. We have the privilege of working with people in such a powerful and developmental part of their life. The students we serve, with our hopes of being welcomed on their journey of growth and success, need us to see them as human, a unique individual with strengths and weaknesses, a unique history, and to do what we can to assist them on that journey. Challenging yourself to know your students better, to develop a trusting relationship, opens the door to magic. When that trust exists, people can ask for help. They can open up. They can feel safe and be vulnerable. The authentic connection that is possible between people is magic. Serving people in our various roles gives us the opportunity to engage in our relationships with a lens of hope and possibility. It may give us the ability to have a conversation that leads to us being able to provide resources for further support. It may be the first time a student walks into a supportive environment, or they may just need to know that a resource exists. The collegiate recovery community offers support to students who are in recovery, wanting to be in recovery, curious about recovery, or those who wish to support others on their recovery journey. This community assists in each individual's unique recovery by working to prevent relapse, encouraging autonomy, providing support, increasing academic success, and offering a safe space and campus to process, grow, and reflect. So thank you for being here and joining us to learn more about how we may all have a role in this journey of people, this journey of hope and opportunity.
I hope everybody's doing well, and I'm very excited to be here. I appreciate the invite in sharing about community and public health and substance use disorders. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen with you. And feel free to ask questions at any time. I'm getting all my screens in order, as you know, the virtual technology navigation. So as Ben said, I do teach in the public health program here. And in being asked to speak today at the Recovery Summit, I took some time. I get so passionate and excited about the topic of substance abuse recovery community and how to work as a community, being a public health professional. And those of you that are in the professional field of serving others in any capacity probably know what public health is. Some of you may not be clear on the definition, but one thing for sure is that public health is kind of in vogue right now, right? We're in the middle of a global pandemic. So those who didn't know what public health was are kind of like, wow, this is interesting. But they may not realize that the focus goes beyond infectious disease. I know that our enrollments are up for the public health major because of it. But before I get into that, I do want to give some general overviews that will certainly support what Ben gave as a wonderful introduction to the summit and how we pull this all together. And what does community really mean to you? What does community mean in what you do every day for yourself and for others? So some of the things I'll cover today, a brief overview about public health, some of the current trends, which we know are all, arrows upward and increasing that Ben has already discussed. I'll just briefly go over that. Defining community, reviewing some protective and risk factors on an individual and community basis, talking about human connection, isolation, and bringing together what is recovery, what does recovery mean to the individual, what does recovery mean in a community, and how does a community support that? So that's what we'll cover, or what I will cover in our next 40 minutes or so. So again, public health, if you have a general understanding or not, I want to be sure that that is spoken and reached to everybody today that's here, not knowing everybody's backgrounds that are listening today. But public health is a science of protecting and improving the health of people in their communities, achieved by promoting healthy lifestyles, researching disease and injury prevention, and detecting, preventing, and responding to infectious diseases. And it's worded a little different depending on where you get it. This is from the CDC Foundation. This is about looking out for the welfare of others and for the entire population. It's protecting us from many things. So not just infectious disease and preventing chronic disease by choosing healthy lifestyles, but also it's about access to quality care. It's about safety in our neighborhoods. It's about safe drinking water. It's about getting our community to its thriving at its healthiest so that if something does happen, like a pandemic, there will be less negative consequence of that. So, for example, if you look at it from an individual standpoint, the healthier someone is, the better their outcome in surviving a pandemic, right? So same for on a community level. The healthier the community, then the better they can be resilient in times of emergency. And we'll talk more about that later in that community component of it. Public health is from a social ecological perspective. So that this is the bigger and easier way to sum up to anybody what public health is. And when we look at this social ecological perspective chart, you have the smallest circle being interpersonal, which is the individual, your larger circle being public policy. And so everything in between, if we address those outer layers, those larger circles, trickles down and creates more healthy individuals. And so in the greater rings of this diagram, when those are addressed, it impacts the larger number of people. So this is about large population approach. It doesn't mean that public health doesn't ever intervene in an individual approach. Some of you are doing that on a daily basis. And a lot of my background is working with individuals as well. But it impacts the community. So for example, if there is a law to put your seatbelt on, then we're going to have less people die in motor vehicle crashes because of that seatbelt. So that is public health issue. So again, public health is not just infectious and chronic disease. It's not just substance abuse prevention or teen pregnancy prevention. It's a lot of other things around all the dimensions of our health and wellness. So given that, what are we dealing with when we talk about substance use disorders? And I'm not going to spend, I was telling Kiana before we started this morning, I didn't want to get too academic this morning. I'm academic all week and teaching classes in public health and reviewing a lot of this. I really wanted to spend some more time on some practical measures and application. But I do think it's worth mentioning just some of the highlights. Healthy people, of course, are decade collections of data and health objectives to meet for the population in the United States. And so Healthy People 2020 just ended, and it ended with a bang, didn't it, with a pandemic. And now we have started Healthy People 2030. So just to give some perspective on the Healthy People targets in 2020, if you look at this chart that I put up here from Healthy People, and bear with me as I am trying to use some, sorry, I'm looking for, it's not allowing me to use the annotation tool, but that's okay, we can still do it. If you look at my arrow, the use of alcohol and illicit drugs, age 12 to 13, the target for 2020 was 12.8%. 2017, it's at 13.8%. So there is a quick view, a quick scan of 2020, but it's still only giving you up to 2018. So there's some data to be collected yet. So it is a little bit lower, I think 13.6 maybe for 2018. And then binge drinking in adults, 18 years and over, the target 2020 goal was 24.2%, and at 2017 we were still at 26.4%. So there's been, there was some decrease, but more decrease to meet those objectives. When we talk about just a couple of points, and there's many more objectives than what I'm highlighting on these infographics from Healthy People. We can look at suicide rates and major depressive episodes. The target in 2020 was 10.2 per 100,000 as far as suicides. And in 2017, we're at 14. Major depressive episodes, the target being 7.5% and that's in adolescents 12 to 17 years. And at 2017, we were at 13.3. So those are the 2020 targets. We've started the 2030 targets. And so what's interesting about the 2030 Healthy People is there is a stronger, and as they plan for each decade of Healthy People, there's more things that are considered. There's evidence collected of how the focus, what objectives need to be changed, what has to be modified. Healthy People 2030 has a strong focus on social determinants of health. And this is the kind of logo that they go with. And what these symbolize are economic stability. Sorry, I'm got too many screens going here. So with economic stability, we're talking about 1 in 10 people live in poverty in the United States. So this is not just about the housing is kind of listed separate, but this is about people's ability to be employed, to maintain employment. This is also about what inequities exist and disparities and addressing those issues. There's education, accessibility, and quality of education. So this is also a mix of objectives that have to do with income levels to access education, as well as disabilities and disparities there. Healthcare access and quality of healthcare. 1 in 10 individuals in the United States have no health insurance. And so this has been a chronic issue in our society in the United States as far as healthcare accessibility, which impacts substance use disorders greatly and other mental health issues, as many of you know, especially those of you working in the field. Neighborhood and built communities. This is about health and safety at work, at school, in recreational areas, and how that is supported. So that could look like putting in sidewalks for safe walking, bike lanes for safe biking, parks having regulations of vaping and smoking in businesses, and then social and community context, which addresses a lot of social issues, including things like bullying and things that affect mental health. So there's a strong focus on social determinants of health, and all of these areas on this graph affect substance use disorders and affect recovery. So what has to be a clear mindset and understanding about recovery, and many times people, when they're in recovery, they're thinking about things they can do for themselves, which we will talk about, but it's also about how their community supports them and the things that are happening in their environment. And I don't want to jump ahead too far because that's some other things we'll be talking about. There are some new objectives and new targets for Healthy People 2030. And I just wanted to show that page on the Healthy People 2030. And you'll see to your right here that there is it says baseline only. So there is, if I click on one of these, what you will see is that the target can't really be, it's not statistically significant right now, or minimally. So there is a target addressed, but they're starting a baseline by starting this objective. So that's really what that means. But drug and alcohol use objectives in general, but then there are objectives that are under the label addiction, adolescence, chronic pain, hospital and emergency services, infectious disease, and you see that the objectives under each of these subtitles are all related to substance use. Injury prevention, the LGBT community, mental health and mental disorders, pregnancy and childbirth. So there's some more subheadings to the Healthy People 2030 and objectives, and you see a lot of baseline only. So a lot of these are new, and you see developmental, and there's none researched under here. So these are some of the objectives that targets for Healthy People 2030. And some of these, if you take some time to go back to this website at health.gov and just look up health, if you just Google Healthy People 2030, it'll take you to it. Support recovery in a different way than has been before. So there is a lot more community-based approach, and that's because of the social determinants of health being a major focus of this. I'm going to go through this briefly. I think Ben touched on this a lot too, is that what has been the effects? COVID-19 is the kind of current event in everything we do, not just recovery, but certainly affects mental and psychological health. And this is a global infographic from the World Health Organization. And this is just showing some of the impact on response plans, disruption in services for mental, neurological, and substance use, and research, and disruption in services to those most vulnerable in reporting. So this is a rapid assessment that was done, and just shows deficits that we have been hearing exist and certainly know exist. The disruption of COVID-19 has been tremendous in all ways. Also, this is just a very small point of the bigger picture, but this is showing the rates of cocaine, fentanyl, heroin, and methamphetamine use. And you look at January of 2020, March, where this dotted line is showing you when it's kind of the national shutdown from COVID-19 and how those rates increased rapidly. So there's lots of evidence to support all the things that we have been talking about are happening. There are lots of support in what's happening post-2020. What are some of the protective factors of substance use? And, you know, this is not a finite list, and I've divided into individual and community protective factors. So protective factors would be things that reduce the risk of substance use disorders in the population. And individual, some of those things, and I'm just going to kind of skim these lists, is, you know, a high self-efficacy and self-esteem, involvement in organized activities, problem-solving skills, social competence, attachment to parents and extended family. And I would also include there anybody considered family. I know I have friends that I consider family, so those could be included in that. Strong communication skills, responsiveness, empathy, and caring, sense of autonomy and purpose, self-discipline, healthy beliefs and clear standards for themselves, emotional stability. We know that we can put some other protective factors. As far as the community, what decreases the risk of substance use disorders in a community? Media literacy, health literacy I'd put in there too. Decreased accessibility to drugs, you know, drugs not being as accessible, increased prices on drugs through taxing. And obviously that's going to address tobacco and alcohol. Raise purchasing age on those substances, as well as enforcement of that, because those exist. If they're not enforced, it doesn't matter very much. High expectations of youth, opportunities for youth involvement, caring and support, accessibility to activities, and cultural competence and knowledge and knowing how to reach people from all cultural backgrounds. Again, not a finite list, but these are things that help reduce the risk, and we're going to pull this together in a bigger picture. But I want you to look at, of course, the community list involves the population, but if we look at the individual list, are there things that need to include other people to be on the list? And so being in organized activities, social competence, attachment to parents and extended family, communication, responsiveness, caring is expressing that towards others. Those and sense of purpose, those can all be things that can only be done if other people are involved and with that person's life. So just keep that in mind as we move forward. Risk factors of substance use on an individual and community basis. So a lot of the opposite of what we just said in the last slide, of course, would turn into a risk factor. And some added things for the individual: inadequate life skills, lack of self-control, lack of peer refusal skills, low self-esteem, low confidence, self-efficacy, emotional and psychological challenges, favorable attitudes towards drug use. If it's not a big, you know, their attitudes and beliefs are like, you know, drug use is not a big deal. Everybody does it. And it creates a norm for them. Rejection of commonly held values. So a little rebellion. Of course, you know, sometimes a little rebellion is good. So it depends on commonly held values. It really depends on if those commonly held values in the community of which that's defined are healthy to begin with. So keep that in mind. Lack of school bonding doesn't mean everybody needs to love school, but academic success does provide a decreased risk of substance use disorders or decrease that risk. Early antisocial behavior, evidence of that, shyness or hyperactivity. Community risk factors, high poverty rates, discrimination, pro-alcohol, tobacco, and other drug messages in the media within that community, higher unemployment or underemployment rates, lack of community bonding, lack of cultural pride, and that would be, evident in investment or lack of investment in the community. If the community attitudes are vulnerable towards drug use or kind of turn their head to that, and what the availability and accessibility to drugs are within that community. What's important about these factors that I want to point out when we talk about recovery is that an individual can't always control their circumstances, their home life, how they were raised, what has happened to them in their lifetime. So that is one importance to community, is that community can provide things that an individual doesn't have in their personal world, in their personal bubble. And so if they can count on some things outside of that, we can meet those needs as a community that are lacking in their home that we may not have the power to change. Real quick, in the chat box, if you would just type one thing, if I were to ask you, how would you define community? What would be a characteristic of community for you, or how you define your own community? Real quick. Connection to others, support, sense of belonging, people who support you. Oh, they're coming in quick. A network connected by shared values, opportunity for connections, friendships, resources, people and resources that support each other, connection and concern, a safe group of people to share, closeness, a group of people that support and care for each other's well-being, so looking out for each other, check-ins, how are you doing, social supports, those around me, people who are your support system, and simply those you are around, local environment, shared culture. Those are all really important things. And so when we define, try to give a general definition of community, a community, or a common definition of community is a group of people with diverse characteristics who are linked by social ties, shared common perspectives, and engage in joint action in geographical locations or settings. So common interests and in some form, and that could be based on anything. What is community health? This is working as a community at a community level to promote healthy living that brings the greatest health benefits to the greatest number of people. We see that happening in this pandemic, in how vaccinations are occurring right now. But community health is also about reducing health gaps. And public health is about that. Public health is community health. Reducing those gaps because of differences in income, education, race, ethnicity, decreasing those inequities and disparities. So what is a healthy community? And how can you contribute to a healthy community? A healthy community continuously creates and improves both its physical and social environments, helping people to support one another in aspects of daily life, to thrive to their fullest potential. So this is something that is addressed on a continuous basis. Basically, what you want to accomplish is that if the community is in their best health, when emergency happens, when things happen like a pandemic or a natural disaster in the community's hopefully at their optimal health, which means they will be most resilient to get through that. And that's the most important part of what a healthy community is to always thriving to be their best and inclusive. I'm going to go through this just as I'm looking at time. I want to get to some other things, but when we talk about recovery, one of the common things that come up and why we're defining community and public health is isolation, loneliness, and that connection that sobriety is Is it about eliminating a chemical or addictive behavior in someone? Is that more important or as important as having a sense of belonging and connection to others? What helps someone thrive the most in their recovery? There were experiments in the 1970s involving rats and addiction, and they were given two options of water, one laced with cocaine or heroin and one just plain water. And they were put in a cage by themselves. And once they started choosing the drug-laced water, they kept going back to it and obsessively going back to it and not choosing the other water. And they were so obsessed with that drug-laced water that they kept drinking that until it killed them. Dr. Alexander was, in reviewing that research, wondered if environment did more studies on what was called the rat park experiments. And what he felt needed to be explored was how the environment, those rats didn't have any other option. It was drug water or no water, no other stimulation. So he created these rat parks where they could roam and play and have, socialize with each other and have some community, and still offered the two, one drug-laced water, one plain water. None of the rats died of overdose. There was less obsessive attention to the drug-laced water. They would drink the other water. And what that was supporting was kind of that early research with understanding addiction and isolation, that they chose community over using the drug, so that it had some impact in the choice of whether to use or not. So that's kind of one, an animal experiment on isolation. There are, and I'm going to kind of go through these because I'm seeing we're running out of time, but there's lots of research in loneliness in older adults and it reducing health and increasing health risk of many different health conditions. There's studies also on here that you can go back and look at that address loneliness in substance-dependent populations, but also starting, there's also a study listed here in Black adults that are HIV positive. So there's some more research studies in isolation coming out that address more specific populations as well. But all of them supporting the fact, and I'm going to skip over this, but supporting that common theme, that connection to others, a sense of belonging and community are really important to support recovery. Recovery is that process of change to improve health and wellness, to thrive at our fullest potential. And an understanding that recovery, we can have recovery for many different reasons, not just substance use. But SAMHSA defines dimensions of recovery. And the common thing I want you to pull out here is that, home and community involve others. So that those, in the 10 guiding principles of recovery that SAMHSA puts out, you can mark half of these or more that involve being connected with other people. And so the common theme again, and I'm sorry to race through this, but I just don't want to go over too far on time. But the common theme here is that these are connected to connecting with others, and that to support recovery and to support any of these things, having purpose involves other people. Okay, some involvement, because having meaning in daily activities will mean the job, will mean school and volunteer work. That'll be defined differently for different people, but the independence to participate in society would be about connection to others. So these are 10 guiding principles. Again, when you talk about many pathways, holistic, peer support, relational, cultural, addressing trauma, this is about connection to others. Positive psychology is getting more attention too, and I'd like to touch based on this. Positive psychology is a field of psychology theory and research that focuses on psychological states, individual traits, or character strengths, and social institutions that enhance subjective well-being and make life most worth living. So to summarize that in more applicable terms, that's about meeting someone where they're at and focusing on their strengths. So as much as we may be in fields where we have to maybe diagnose conditions, to focus on what someone's strengths are. And I think for individuals supporting their own recovery, this is true as well. What do you do well? What does the person do well? What does the community do well? As a public health professional, I want to focus on the strengths of a community and their resources that they already have. Because here is the fact of the matter. That is where we start. That's what we have to start with. We can't create things that aren't there. And so when you start with what is strong and build off of that, for the individual, new skills and new strategies can be practiced and they can grow from there. But I think it's really important that strengths are focused on. So I had that moment of panic. I'm going to be totally transparent that the talk ended at 9:45, but I realized I have more time. When we talk about positive psychology, I want to bring that back to the individual risk factors and protective factors, because why this positive psychology can be important too. When we meet someone who, let's say, is newly in recovery from an addiction, whether it be chemical or behavioral, without a chemical. So either way, when we meet them where they're at, and let's say it's a student of mine, or you're in the public school system and it's a student or a child in an after-school program, whatever it may be, you see a lot of deficits where they're going home every day, wherever they're living every day, who they're spending their time around. You see that maybe there's trauma, maybe there is some unhealthy components that are feeding this person in a negative way, increasing their risk for relapse. Some of those things we can't change. Some of those things they may not be able to change right away. So this is why it's critical that their strengths are focused on. When you are with an institution or an organization, what are the strengths? And then how can you build more strengths off of that? So this is really a way to apply that positive psychology and affirming the strengths within the individual, within the organization, within the community, and however that community is defined. I'll often ask individuals to define what is their community. They usually have a closer community and a community that's further out. So I have my family, my friends, then I have my workplace, and other activities and things that I'm involved in or could potentially be involved in. What if I don't have family? Then I go to my friends. What if I don't have healthy friends right now? Because that's part of recovery healing too. So we'll talk about that in the next list. So just ways of that practical application of positive psychology. When we talk about supports of recovery, we have individual, these are not finite lists. You could all add things to this. Seeking out support groups. I want to address that immediately though, when we talk about substance use disorders and we talk about people that are in treatment or in a support group with other people in recovery, assessing that community, that individual assessing that community for themselves, and probably with the help of someone who is helping them in recovery, whether that be a counselor or some kind of, let's label it, recovery coach at this point, because they could be working with them from many different capacities. There's a research study that assessed the sense of support, perception of support within a residential treatment program. And within that residential treatment program, the perception of support among their peers, some felt that those relationships inhibited their recovery and some encouraging recovery. So that is something to understand, because I think when people are in a recovery place, they can be of support, or maybe they can't be of great support, depending on where they're at with their own recovery. So I think that's something to keep in mind. And I think those of you that are clinicians probably understand exactly what I'm talking about. So how are those relationships defined, and is that a healthy relationship to support? So those who are in recovery as well give support to each other, for very much so, but we need to pull in the community part of that to keep that a healthy community. So paying attention to how those relationships are developing. Recreational groups, you see the things that were risk factors and protective factors in here: counseling, academic engagement, and learning of all kinds, mindfulness, expressive art, stress management, developing any new skills or interests that will support positive growth in that person would be ways for someone to support their own recovery. And so I also put sober playgrounds and playmates. Often people who are addicted to substances isolate themselves, and the friends that they have may be engaging in the same behaviors, which is not a positive support for them, and they may be hanging in environments that encourage it. For some, others may use very privately and separate the two, but they are still isolating themselves. So all of that would have to be assessed by the individual. When we talk about community resources, and I'm going to, went to specific things, but our campus would be a first place to start. Wellness and Prevention Services provides so much support. They have their recovery community, but there's lots of things, and I just pulled a handful of things that we have on campus, and Ben spoke to a lot of them in the introduction as well, of ways to get involved. Getting involved is a way to be connected. It's a way to nurture new relationships. It's a way to grow friendships, and it's a way to belong. So as a student at Appalachian State, we have resources that go right to the student. As a community of Watauga County, we also have supporting services, and proud to say Appalachian State works so much with those community resources. These are some of our community support groups, and one thing that I wanted to bring mention to was the Watauga Compassionate Community Initiative. And the surrounding, just the sample list I put up here: the Watauga Substance Abuse Prevention, Western Youth Network, Mountain Alliance. A lot of these things people would say, but Colleen, those are prevention services. Some of those are just really prevention of substance use disorders. But what we need to understand is that when we put things in place for prevention of substance use disorders, we are also supporting recovery. So a lot of those things are supporting recovery by making the community healthier when we are addressing the issue of substance use. So whether that's, decreasing the demand from our population to want drugs, decreasing accessibility, increasing the amount of activities and opportunities for youth, because in public health and in all health, we know that the youth are defining our future in health. So if we can start from a young age and get them healthy, we can prevent some of these things. But having these things in place are also supporting recovery. I think of something like Western Youth Network, and someone may say, well, that's substance abuse prevention. Those are young kids, and the programming that they do. But some of those kids have experienced the trauma that Ben was defining when we talk about adverse childhood experiences. And the Watauga Compassionate Community Initiative was about creating a trauma-informed community. And what an outstanding movement that has been. Many of you are probably involved, and the link on here gives the video, and I would encourage you to go to the conference that's coming up this spring for Watauga Compassionate Community Initiative. But that is about, and there's more momentum in making the community of Watauga County more trauma-informed on all levels with all people who provide services. And a small thing that my dad always told me when I was a kid, and I thought, when I was looking, like, something always has to be so great and impactful and huge. And does it really have to be huge and impactful every day? Recovery is about sustaining healthy behaviors and living a healthy way. So it's the small habits, how you spend your mornings, how you talk to yourself, what you read, what you watch, who you share your energy with, and who has access to you that will change your life. My dad always said, happiness is about everyday life, and that's about loving your routine and having some impactful experiences along the way. I want to share this very quick 1-minute video with you and then leave it open for questions.
There's something about sharing your story with other people that gives them a sense of hope that they're not alone. To be in a group with other people who are going through the same thing just makes it so much easier.
For someone with depression, those connections are life-saving. They're so important.
Lots of people actually would contact me back after watching a few of my videos and say something like, you gave me the words I didn't have.
And with the help of a good support team, doctor, psychiatrist, therapist, you could get through it and you can actually be a stronger person because of it.
My friends were significantly important for my recovery.
That's why oftentimes we need people around us, you know, and with my wife and my daughter, you know, I mean, I often say that they're my best antidepressants.
So again, it being about connection and our communities connecting and keeping people connected to support each other, all the things you defined as community. Any questions? I feel like I have so much more I want to say. Anybody have any questions? The one thing that I want to just piggyback on with Ben and his introduction is that substance use disorders are very complex, and everything about how our community intertwines is complex. But this sense of connection, and I think we're going to see what isolation effects from COVID are going to be like. We already know we're kind of bracing ourselves for that in our communities, but it's going to be defined maybe different than the outcome of isolation that is generally happening already. But connection, 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 belongingness, belongingness, belongingness. I'd say if there's two things to walk away with for healthy communities that serve those who've been affected by trauma, that serve any mental health conditions, including substance use disorders, it just allows us to thrive, is connection. And that's not about being extroverted or introverted, regardless. And there's no wrong or right way. It doesn't, you know, being introverted is not right or wrong. Being extroverted is not right or wrong. But connection will be defined differently for each person. But having connection and belongingness is important regardless of where you are on that spectrum. Thank you for having me today.
Thank you, Colleen. I appreciate it very much. And we welcome all the wisdom and knowledge that you provided today. To the group, we are coming to a close on our first session, and we will be back at 10:10. If you were able to register, then you already have a link for the session starting at 10:10. If you were not, I will post a Zoom link in the chat box for those of you who may be interested. Coming up next will be Dr. Dominiquie Clemmons-James, who will be discussing inclusivity within recovery spaces. So please join us if you can. And if there's anything you need, please let me know.
With all of you, see some familiar faces, definitely. So feel free to shout me out and say hey in the chat. Just some general objectives. Today I'm going to touch base on just kind of an overview on the importance of inclusivity in recovery. I'm going to talk a little bit about some barriers and challenges that come with that, as well as with particular people of color in a collegiate recovery setting. I'm going to touch base a bit on learning to be inclusive and what kind of strategies you can be helpful for that, as well as just creative strategies to not only ensure that your program is inclusive, but so are your events, so are your programming and weekly events as well. So let's talk a bit about the diversity in collegiate recovery. So obviously right now there's about 138 collegiate recovery programs and counting every day in the United States. And at least 5 of them are HBCUs. And that number grows each time I talk to someone different. And that's wonderful. So being able to see that change in diversity and inclusion on a national level has been rewarding, just kind of in the collegiate recovery world in general. But it's also been empowering because this growth is a mere ripple effect in the field of recovery that is, rippling to various other recovery support services outside of universities and colleges. I myself have been personally, just kind of approached by, different entities that say, hey, we're minority owned, or hey, we're really trying to learn how to better serve this population. Can you help us? And that is definitely a step in the right direction. Click over here. There we go. So it's a well-known fact and just kind of point of awareness that addiction affects everybody, right? It doesn't discriminate. That being said, it's unheard of to exclude, any identity, especially if any identity can be affected. So just kind of a snapshot, as a general snapshot here, just some general stats that are related to Black and African-American populations in the United States. Looking at the substance use disorder side of things alone, we can see that many are experiencing addiction and a need for recovery support. And this population is being severely impacted. Historically speaking, this is also a population that's been the most difficult to help due to decreased help-seeking behaviors and other factors like accessibility, cost, geographic location, and things like that. So 2 things about the snapshot that stand out to me the most are the overlap of substance use disorders and mental health, concerns, which reminds us of how identities can overlap. For instance, these stats may be a bit higher for African Americans that also identify as part of the LGBT community, or if they identify as that plus being a Southerner, or any combination of identities. And the second thing about the snapshot is that it captures the age range of the population I serve, college students, and everything that comes with that identity. So speaking of students, a little bit about my program. I'm at North Carolina A&T State University. It is a historically Black college/university, or an HBCU. And we're part of that, the at least 5 HBCU statistic you saw earlier for collegiate recovery. We are the largest HBCU in the nation, and we were the first to develop a collegiate recovery community. And as a historically Black college population, it is predominantly Black or African American. So while the term people of color, as I go forth to use it, can apply to other races and ethnicities outside of Black or African Americans, just want to emphasize staying in my lane and speaking mostly about including Black and African American students in addiction and recovery efforts on your campus. So everything that we do at Aggies for Recovery is based on what we know about our students, their needs, their likes, their characteristics, all of that. So when we started, we made a note to do a campus temperature check, every so often to conceptualize our students. And so here we have our student profile, basically what we know about our students. So our students are social creatures, like down to a T. They like to have a good time. They like to feel like they get something enjoyable out of experiences, especially if they're experiences put on by the university, which obviously have to be, wellness, positive, or, educational. So that's why our programs are fun yet informative when it comes to our recovery programming, which we'll talk a bit more and give examples a little bit later on. And our use of social media and causes our approaches to be a bit more entertaining than usual. And it allows students to see us too, like 2 to 3 times a week in our recovery outreach habitat and, in our daily group work as well. Our students are family oriented. They take family very seriously. They create friendships while they're here at school that become a lot like families, and they become very protective of each other. They want to help each other. They want to defend each other and all that stuff. They also tend to come in groups to events, or groups to get help. Like it's more like, I'm having this problem. Okay, well, if you're having this problem, then we both gonna work on it. Let's go see what we can do for you, even if it's, has nothing to do with them. Or they show up in groups to learn how to help each other. Our students are immersed in campus culture. Like it is no secret that if something on campus happens at 5 a.m., by 5:04, the whole campus knows about it. It doesn't matter where they are. They're always in the know about happenings on campus, in town, and off-campus surroundings. They always know where, different events are happening. And so this awareness often includes knowledge of substance abuse, people, places, and things, whether they partake or not. So this is a prominent characteristic, given that some of our students come from communities where substance use, particularly marijuana, is a normal part of life. And so they already are kind of enmeshed in that addiction and recovery area because they're being affected some way with knowledge, whether they participate or not. So they may have, family members, in their actual families who partake, and there are specific rules about that, which then translate to the families they make here. And finally, our students are very independent in nature. So yes, they are social. Yes, they like to be connected. Yes, they build families, but they are also very independent. They like their space. They value greatly their autonomy and their ability to make their own decisions. And so with that really tends to, inform how we approach them when we talk about addiction recovery, how we approach them, when we want to point things out about their, use behaviors. And so it's always important for us to just kind of meet them where they are and let them define their own recovery, because, again, that autonomy is a great value. It is a huge, hierarchical need for them. And so to impede upon that, you've already lost them. So that's why we embrace, various pathways and alternative pathways to recovery, because it allows us to meet them where they are. They get the benefit of being in control of their recovery and building their own lifestyle, and to be successful in the realm of self-help with some guidance from us. So once we found out how our students are, we also explored things that got in the way, their barriers, their challenges, and, special circumstances that help or hinder them from getting their needs met. So surface level challenges include things like stigma, being viewed as weak or unstable, financial difficulties, which can offset accessibility concerns, and, just what's available and knowledge of what could be available for them, and just a lack of understanding about recovery as a process. There's also, just kind of a lack of language that goes with that too. It's like when I got here in 2015, it wasn't unusual to say, hey, what do you know about addiction and recovery? And they would look at you sideways like, what is that? What are you talking about? And so psychoed became, a huge piece of what we did to get our program up and running. Because we can't always assume that everyone is on the same level as we are, regardless of how knowledgeable or common, addiction and recovery is for us in this world. And so helping them build those bridges to not only learn the language of recovery, but also to apply it and implement it and say, oh, this translates to this for me. It's like, oh, okay, so addiction, is about, an attitude or an intention behind my use. Well, sometimes I use it just to not be bored. I feel like that might count. Maybe I should go with y'all, things like that. So granted, most of these, low-level challenges can be eased with the right amount of psychoeducation, outreach, and just general campus presence. But there are some deeper concerns that serve as firm barriers to recovery among African-American students. And a lot of these, are just not your everyday circumstances. So community normalization of use, we kind of briefly touched on that. It puts it puts a different kind of weight on what stigma is to Black student recovery, these special circumstances. So if I come from a community where, marijuana use is normal, my cousin up the street knows the plug for the week for the neighborhood, we all go to school together, no one calls the cops, no one gets hurt, it's normal. So when I go to a different community, I take my community values with me. And, sometimes I run up against trouble. Sometimes my use gets translated to, oh, this is addictive behavior, but this is so normal for where I come from. Funding through trafficking is a big one. And a lot of things about these special circumstances is people don't realize or don't think or don't believe that this is real. And it is real for a lot of our students. So some of our students are having their education funded through trafficking, because there's a lack of education awareness around, going to school, the financial aid portion, all of that stuff, things that we're not taught, we find other ways to do it. So, if I'm determined for my child to go to college to be better than me, I'm going to do what I can to be able to pay for it. And sometimes that includes trafficking. And along with that, family systems are affected by that. It's affected by the substance use culture because if I grow up in a place where, one, it's normal in my community, two, in my family, we don't snitch, we don't call the cops, we don't do any of that because we're protecting the family, essentially, regardless of what they're doing, I can't turn my back and say, oh, this is wrong, funding through trafficking is wrong because, I'm trying to be more in recovery lifestyle. It's a huge complication and it gets very murky. And also, just how institutional racism deters from regular help-seeking behaviors, because there are often times where they come up against things like, oh, I'm not going to the counseling services office, or I'm not going to the tutoring office because it doesn't seem like that's something that's for us. Because historically, that has been the message. So now that we have just some background information, some stats, some, colorful examples, what can universities and programs do to engage students of color and offer them addiction and recovery support on their campus? Well, step one, logistics matter, right? So really thinking about, even if you're just developing your program or if you're reevaluating your program to, make some differences and make some changes, looking in your details. What are your requirements, for your program? Do they have to be, formal members? Can anyone just kind of step out? Do they have a trial period? What are the membership stipulations? Are they required to completely be abstinent from everything or not? Are they required to meet with you or meet with the sponsor twice a week? What are the requirements? Because sometimes those types of things can deter students from wanting to be all the way involved. It's well, I want to be involved because I want to be involved, but if I got to jump through hoops to do that, I can just do my own thing over here and be okay. So, just kind of being mindful of that. Also looking at who's involved. Who are your staff? Who are your volunteers? What are your students like? Have they been, spoken to or trained on diversity and inclusion tactics? Have they been, exposed to just kind of programs, like this, summits like these, where they can learn more about how to be more inclusive? How do you define recovery for your program and for your campus? That one becomes really huge too, because that's how you're representing yourself to your students, right? It's okay, this is, what we believe in, this is what we stand for, to let you know whether or not you want to be a part of us or not. And what are your programs and events like? Are they just straight psycho-ed? Are they just straight social? Are they a mixture between the two? And most importantly, do they fill a need? So you'll notice the last two have two asterisks at the bottom. So those are the ones I'm going to kind of dive into a bit more in detail. So as I was mentioning, how do you define recovery on your campus? How you define it matters, and because you're defining how your campus views and or accepts recovery. And so at Aggies for Recovery, we use Sam's definition because we noticed that addiction and behavioral disorders weren't mentioned at all in the definition. It's very broad, but still has a very concise quality message. So given our student profile we just And, just some of those special circumstances our students experience, we know our definition had to be inclusive of those factors. So we took it to heart. We took this definition to heart as we crafted how recovery would be defined on our campus. And so at Aggies for Recovery, we have an all-inclusive definition of recovery to make sure everyone can strive to the goals that they set forth in the SAMHSA definition. So for us, it doesn't matter if you're in recovery from substance use, behavioral addiction, trauma, mental or emotional distress, or maybe adjusting to a new phase of life or accessibility concern. Because don't forget, our students are also in a, transition period in life where they're, developing skills and doing something different to become someone different by the time they graduate, regardless if they're, brand new or if they're non-traditional students. So we're all inclusive here. And several of our students fall into these categories, sometimes more than one, because again, multiple identities can still be affected by addiction. So being all-inclusive also has the added advantage of increasing allies, increasing advocacy efforts, and most importantly, normalizing recovery and recovery lifestyle efforts on our campus. Our definition also incorporates just kind of wellness as a focal point and a goal of recovery, and just kind of being able to change your lifestyle for the better to implement and include positive life experiences. So kind of going back to that institutional racism portion of, well, that's not for us. We are, kind of nice, like a nice warm handoff or segue into different experiences. So it's like, okay, I do enjoy this, so maybe it is for me, so we can get away from some of that siloed thinking and be more inclusive, on both sides. All right, so let's talk a bit more about just kind of filling a need on the campus, right? So do your programs, do your events, do your outreach fill a need? So once again, based on our student profile, obviously substance use and behavioral addiction are, two kind of go-tos. But one thing we also noticed is that even though our students are social, sometimes their social skills are lacking, communication difficulties, handling disagreements, just making friends in general, just having healthy relationships in general was a huge area of struggle for our students. And you'll find that, once you start getting, thinking outside the box a little bit, you will find that you can tie addiction and recovery support to any type of skill, any type of need on your campus, because everything is connected for people because their identities are connected. And so for us, for a lot of our students, their social skills were, greatly lacking because they either had to come out of circles where, addiction and substance use were, the prominent thing that held them together, or they are, trying to just rebuild their social circle and they lack the social skills needed because they've always had to rely on, the commonality of substance use. So here are just a kind of a few examples of our, programming. Our Smart Recovery meeting, we don't call it Smart Recovery because that's not something that's appealing, right? It sounds very established, very institutional, and it doesn't help students connect. We call ours Get Off the Struggle Bus because it is a language they understand. It is a phrase that is common on our campus, and it really conveys the point of what we're trying to do. We're trying to better ourselves. We're trying to eliminate struggle. Squad Goals is one of our older social awareness, social skills programs. And so, having it look as appealing as, a meetup between friends was very successful. And we also have a wellness awareness focus need on our campus because we have several campaigns and initiatives going on, but no one's really explaining them to our students. And so once again, we act as kind of like a warm handoff, as well as how to incorporate wellness into your recovery lifestyle. And so R&B relaxation is one of the ways we do that. We collaborate with Campus Rec and all of that stuff just to kind of have it be, a different experience that they may not get in their own communities. They may not get if they venture out on their own. So filling a need on your campus is important. And that's, how you define your programming and how you get that campus awareness and increase and attract, more of an audience that you may be lacking. So what does your program offer that's appealing, and how do we know that it's appealing? The bottom line is to draw from your campus and create culturally relevant programming. So cultural relevance. Your program and events are culturally relevant if what you do and how you do it is relevant to the audience or the population you serve or you're trying to serve. So with that being said, let's talk a bit more about cultural relevance, right? So it's basically getting to know your campus, right? How well do you know? Do you know what the hotspot locations are? Do you know where people tend to congregate? Where advertising and outreach do the best? Who are the active groups on campus? Is SGA just kind of well known, or is it just something that people join to have on their resume? Are there religious groups on campus? Are there faith-based things on campus that tend to get a lot of attention? Are they frequent campus visitors? How does student development look? I can tell you right now, I can walk down my campus and see, who's a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed freshman, who is a sophomore because they're walking around in their pajamas, who is a senior because they're just ready to go. Like, knowing your campus culture becomes important. Knowing what's trending, knowing what your students care about, knowing, who's important to them at the time, what societal influences are happening, and what impacts are happening on your campus. So using all of these things, you can tap into, the things that your students find relevant, thus creating culturally relevant programs and events for your campus. So just kind of going back to answering that step 2 process of, well, how do you engage in support? If you've got this information, the key is creativity. Creativity starts with how and where you collect your information and then how you use it. So just with creativity being key, step 1, get out of your comfort zone and collaborate. Get curious about other organizations and support. Like, granted, we're trying to build up our program. We're trying to, do our own thing. But if I've never stepped out and gone to our multicultural center or gone to our LGBT, support center, how do I know, that my students don't belong to these identities as well? And how can I not collaborate, if the goal is for all of us to support our students as best we can? So just kind of getting out of those comfort zones, whether it's picking an event at random that you'd never think to go to and just going to see who's there, that'd be perfect. And obviously be innovative in your information collection. We'll talk a bit more about that. So campus collaboration can be found anywhere. I mean, anywhere. It's just a matter of, like I said, getting out of your usual social circles, getting out of your usual, academic circles. So like I said, whether that means choosing a new campus event to go to at random, or, just kind of seeing who's there or what the needs are and how they may connect with your program. Because again, networking program-wise can be beneficial for everyone involved, and it spreads the message of recovery and of student support in every arena. Or simply being in the right place at the right time for a student you may not have met otherwise. That can happen too. So just kind of looking at some of this. So one of our collaborations that we didn't really even think to do was with our campus rec center. We developed a program with them called Rec for Recovery because a lot of students, wanted to change and organize their wellness lifestyle and recovery lifestyle, included some wellness outings that we just couldn't provide. But they were also, not sure about the resources at Campus Rec or just felt comfortable going. So, we would go with them, we would show up, we would introduce them to everybody we knew there and make it a more, comfortable, personal kind of exchange as opposed to, oh, well, let me just refer you to this resource, just go there and see what it's about. Instead, it's a more of a supported kind of thing because again, institutional history, that may not be for me. I have to be shown that it's for me. Another collaboration we have is with, our mental health group on campus, Active Minds. And so we collaborate with them and they connected us actually with outside campus partners that also, connected to things that were relatable because not only do some of our students have addiction and recovery support concerns, they also have mental health concerns. And sometimes they go hand in hand. And so being able to go hand in hand with resources that support as well doubles our, support. So going along with innovative information collection and dispersal, if you will. So a useful component for our program is the use of our social media. It serves as both information collector and distributor, which lends itself to campus presence, student awareness, and just getting exposure to audiences that aren't, familiar with who we are, where we are on a campus. So utilizing, just the tools that is afforded with it, we use polls to inform our smart recovery meetings every week. We use our analytics to, get to know our campus some more and see if what we're doing is working for them or if there's something missing, because it can be burdensome trying to chase students around to evaluate your program and do a survey. So using your social media analytics is a great way to get to know your campus. So, my campus has a specific hashtag to grab the attention of North Carolina A&T students and affiliates of our university. So this is how we do a lot of our advertising, getting to know and engaging our audience. And it's like letting them test the waters, digitally and virtually to see if they want to engage with us in person or not. So here are just kind of a few insights, things that we grabbed from our Instagram, things that we've grabbed, just from everywhere that we use social media. So the best thing about paying attention to your campus culture in social media is they literally are telling you what they like, what they dislike, what they need, what they're into, and what they have opinions about. And so using these, it informs, our program development. Like here, we know what time our followers are online, so we know when to advertise. Here we have age and gender specifics of our followers just to kind of see, okay, who should we gear more towards, who seems to be needing the most, help with certain things. So it informs development, promotion, demographic specific outreach. So if you don't have students that identify as being in recovery or have just not heard of your program, they may identify as one of, these other identities, and this may be worth looking into. So talking a bit about relevant programming. So once we are shown what our students like or dislike, we get informed how to program and how to advertise. So paying attention to things like word choice, hashtags, and phrases can make the difference in who you're trying to reach. So one thing that's pretty basic, obviously, is how we word or showcase our program has an effect on whether or not we attract students, more specifically, all students, diverse types of students. It's not an uncommon practice for us to be able to, make 3 flyers for the same thing, just because if I can identify with what's on the flyer, I'm more likely to show up. While, the diverse and inclusive pictures are great that you can look up on Google and it's like, okay, well, it's a rainbow coalition of people. Perfect. It's still not appealing to students of color. It seems a bit artificial to some of them, and it doesn't seem like there's effort there. And so, like I said, 3 flyers with the same message, but different types of people showcased on there attracts those people. And then when they all get there, they all connect. They all see, okay, this is for all of us, and this is perfect. So it's more of a step-by-step instead of just a giant leap. That's another thing about kind of our student independence and autonomy is they like details. They like to know how you got from A to D as opposed to just jumping. So paying more attention to things like that. So in the case of HBCUs, paying attention to common language and phrases found in music, social media, especially Black Twitter and other handles and hashtags that appeal to college students of color, inform how we word events and attract attention. Otherwise, it's just a neutral university announcement that gets lost in your email. So paying attention to them, also kind of shows how we facilitate these programs. Like too late, too often, not something I would say in my vocabulary. I don't say that, but our students say that. And so that is something that appeals to them because they'll actually look at it. It speaks the language that they speak. So here are just kind of a few examples of how we've kind of upgraded over the years. Whereas, this one advertisement here, our 12-step meeting that it used to be, nothing wrong with it. It's pretty generic, pretty standard information, but it was not attracting our students. And so when we transferred over to Smart Recovery, as I said, we renamed it Get Off the Struggle Bus. That's a phrase our students understood. That's a phrase that stood out to them as I can identify with that. Once again, we had, our relaxation group. We used to call it regroup, but now we call it R&B relaxation because that is a music choice of common relevance on our campus. And so that's another thing, kind of stepping out of comfort zones. Like if you have a particular genre of music that you like to listen to, stepping out of that could be helpful. If you hear a song on campus or if you hear students talking about a song on campus, maybe give it a shot, try it out. Now, granted, some of it may be offensive and just uncomfortable, but the point is to bond. The point is to, kind of get a different perspective and have another experience of someone else. Just like assignments that we, get in class or used to get in class or assigned to class, try another cultural activity, go to a mosque or go to, a different place that you wouldn't usually go to a different, go to an Asian supermarket. It's just like that, but it's in real life. So Go Best Friend, that's my best friend. That was one of our first social wellness groups. And that is a lyric of a song that was popular with our students at the time. And then we upgraded the squad goals because of the, relevant hashtag at the time. And now we have, different advertisements for just different mental health and recovery check-ins. Like You Good, that was a trending hashtag for a long time. And that's something our students still say on our campus. And you also may notice, on this flyer particularly, the silhouettes are of Black and African American descent because that is who our students identify with. That is, who we're trying to attract to make sure that they are covered. And so, really playing around with how you advertise, how you, phrase your details on your flyers is important. So just on diversity and inclusion overall, you may have noticed that throughout this presentation, I've been saying things that seem either pretty obvious or common sense. Simply put, these strategies can apply to any population. And that's the beauty of it, right? We often think that diversity and inclusion means going out of our way to be inclusive, but it really means putting forth equal effort in all areas, not becoming complacent in how we do things and approaching everyone the same way. The point is to approach them in general. So the biggest takeaway of creating the space for students is, to make sure there's room for everybody. I emphasize getting to know your campus culture because if we get a big picture and lay of the land and we know who's missing, we know what's missing. And, by digging deeper into campus culture and getting to know our campus, we learn where to find them. We learn, which events to go to. We learn which areas of campus to hang out around and spend time with, do our walks during our lunch break with, or eat lunch at. And then, we get to know them and learn what their needs are. So make time to find out, who's not in your program, who's not represented. And, for us being at HBCU, it's easy to just assume that sometimes because, we also, assume just because, that's who we serve predominantly, but we also have, international students, people in the LGBT community, other identities that we discover that are missing on our campus or from our program. And so learning to find underrepresented identities is a great initiative because, just because they're not utilizing your resource doesn't mean they don't exist on your campus or that they don't need your resources, that they don't need your help. This is also why collaborations with other campus entities are important to approach the student population like a joint effort and blanket support so that, you are identifying these pockets of people that may need your service. So go visit your multicultural center, your theater department, your Black alumni associations, your campus regulars to learn, what their needs are and what they've heard on campus. Because even though, we're in our offices, we're running our programs, we're doing our work, they've got their ear to the ground because they are literally out there in it and their input is important. So I spoke earlier about normalizing recovery on our campus as a goal. And so by bringing other students and identities and departments into the realm of collegiate recovery support, it is normal on our campus for people to talk about their recovery process, even if that's not what they call it. To be considerate and respectful of people who are in recovery and who, are finding their way to make their recovery lifestyle. Like I said, when I got here, psycho ed wasn't there. Everyone's like, addiction recovery, what does that mean? And now it's not uncommon to walk on my campus and, you know, hear other people being considerate of each other and hear conversations like, hey, we're going to have this kickback in such and such a room. You know, what can I get you? As opposed to, we're drinking, we're doing all this, you know, do you need soda? Do you need, you know, whatever? And so things of that nature, being more respectful. So finishing up with that point, we actually discovered an underrepresented population on our campus that I myself am a part of. Blurs, or Black nerds as they're called, are people of color, usually African-American or Black, that engage in activities that are often seen as alternatives, such as being into Japanese culture, anime, mangas, cosplay, cons, all things like that. So when learning about Blurs on our campus, we created this group for them because not only had they experienced social isolation and ridicule from the majority of the population, but they're also experiencing, you know, the usual college experience of trying to make friends without the social skills, substance use experimentation, and behavioral addiction. All of that stuff rolled into one. So as a person of color who used to believe that institutional resources weren't for me in particular, we definitely had to act and create space for this population specifically. So seeing a need and filling a need is as easy as it gets to creating space, because recovery is for everyone. And I thank you for any questions, comments, concerns. If you do have any, you can feel free to email me. I'm always willing to consult. I'm always willing to hold space, you know, to help people brainstorm on how to improve their efforts, improve their programs, something that's very near and dear to my heart and I absolutely love to do.
Thank you so much, Dr. CJ. I really enjoyed that presentation, especially thinking about who are our students and how can we use different offices on our campus to collaborate, not just for recovery specific folks.
And if left untreated, they can be one of the most deadly psychiatric diagnoses. Anorexia nervosa especially is actually the number 1 deadly psychiatric diagnosis out of all of the diagnoses that are psychiatric in the DSM-5. Medical complications that frequently occur, there can be bone loss, heart arrhythmias, stroke, sudden death, electrolyte abnormalities, esophageal rupture. So there's a long list of different medical complications that can occur. And one reason why it's so important that we are able to identify and help these students that we find may have an eating disorder is because treatment is most successful when it's initiated during the first 3 years of symptom onset. So the earlier we find it, the better chance we have of helping our students. And appropriate treatment is paramount to recovery. So by getting treatment, people are more likely to have a really positive recovery prognosis. The main types of eating disorders that we manage in the Eating Concerns treatment team are anorexia nervosa, which is the one that I said is the most deadly. It is a restriction leading to low body weight. Patients have an intense fear of gaining weight, and they have a body image distortion. Now, under anorexia nervosa, there is a binging type, and there's a purging type. And then the second type is a restricting type. And then also under anorexia is that there is an atypical anorexia where they are either binging and purging, where they're restricting, not binging and purging, but their weight is not significantly low. So they have a normal body mass index, but they are still restricting severely. Then there's bulimia nervosa, which is binge eating with compensation. And that compensation can take many forms: laxatives, exercise, vomiting, food restriction. And then there's a binge eating disorder, where there are recurrent episodes of binge eating with the patient's perceived loss of control, but yet they have no compensatory behavior. So they're not excessively exercising or purging through vomiting or using diuretics or laxatives. So as we said, it's so important to find these disorders early. So how can you help? How can we help? What signs might we see in a student or a peer or a friend or a family member? And they are, some of them seemingly vague, but if you notice dramatic weight loss or someone dressing in layers, either to stay warm or to hide weight loss, limiting or refusing foods, eating past fullness. One that's not on here would be like frequent trips to the bathroom after eating, body preoccupation, changes in mood, excessive exercise, increased isolation, which is interesting because during this time of COVID, we have been seeing increases in the amount of eating disorders we've been seeing because students are more isolated due to COVID restrictions. If you notice decreased participation in class or sports, getting dizzy or feeling weak easier, these could be signs also. Inability to concentrate or decreased attention span. Or if one of these possible warning signs is brought to the person's attention, if they get excessively defensive about it, that could also be a possible warning sign. Now, of course, these are very vague, so some of these could also be signs of other things like depression or some physical illnesses. But these are just some things that you could look out for if in friends, peers, students. Now, there's also disordered eating. So these are classifications or examples that don't fall into that those other categories that I spoke of earlier. And they have, oh, sorry.
Would you like me to speak to these?
Yes, that'd be great.
Okay. So again, I'm Jana, I'm the dietitian. Disordered eating is something that we see often. So disordered eating, we kind of flip those terms, right? And I see this, I think, sometimes more often than those with diagnosable eating disorders. So someone with disordered eating will have some of the behaviors, but not all of the symptoms of an eating disorder. So they don't meet all the criteria for a diagnosis of one of the eating disorders that Dr. Hinnant mentioned. But again, it could develop into an eating disorder. And so examples of disordered eating include following fad diets. And so these are things, like the paleo diet, the ketogenic diet, the Atkins diet, the zone diet, the Whole30, intermittent fasting. All of these are types of fad diets that kind of masquerade as healthy diets. And may be healthy for some populations that they were initially designed for, but again, aren't necessarily healthy for all. So following fad diets is an example of disordered eating. Emotional eating, so eating when one is feeling stressed or feeling sad or feeling lonely or turning, towards food or to food to fill some sort of emotional need. Chronic dieting is disordered eating, and to that specifically, I'm of calorie counting, and tracking and counting one's calories has been made very easy with the creation of MyFitnessPal and other such apps, but that often leads to really black and white ways of thinking, obsessive ways of thinking, perfectionist ways of thinking, and all of this can cause one to become preoccupied with food and with what they eat. It often makes one kind of, so for example, if you're counting calories and an app is telling you to eat a particular amount and you hit that amount, one may feel like they've really succeeded, feel really good about themselves. But if they exceed that amount, may feel like they've failed in some way. I've had students who tell me that when you go over a certain amount on MyFitnessPal, it turns red, and seeing that red color makes them feel bad about themselves. So again, chronic dieting, counting calories, tracking calories, these are types of disordered eating. Using good versus bad food language. So again, categorizing foods in that way. These are good foods, these are bad foods. And if you're trying to, use that as a way to eat, to diet, I only eat these types of foods, then you eat something that you have categorized as bad or put on your bad food list. Well, then that often leads to feeling bad about oneself because you've eaten something that is bad. There's feelings of shame or guilt or feelings that, and that may lead to feelings that you need to compensate by over-exercising, by self-induced vomiting, something like that, which obviously can result in a true eating disorder. And again, sometimes that's missed or not really recognized as disordered eating, that good versus bad food language, because just culturally it's viewed as healthy, not eating these things that might have, sugar in them or something, and eating these foods that, again, culturally we view as healthier. So it goes kind of unrecognized. Clean eating is another type of disordered eating. Orthorexia is not, that term was coined, I think, in 1998, and it's not recognized in the DSM-5 as a eating disorder diagnosis yet, but it's that obsession with clean eating, of eating no processed foods or less processed foods. And again, the issue there is not that we shouldn't think about eating more whole foods and less processed foods, but this becomes a very obsessive way of eating. And even within the list of foods one might eat, that often begins to shrink. And so what they allow becomes less and less. And again, there's just an obsession with it. These are all, as I said, examples. And there's more, that are disordered eating that may evolve into an eating disorder.
I love you saying that the distinction between disordered eating and eating disorder. And a lot of these that you mentioned, I know the research shows can be kind of like the gateway drug to an eating disorder is kind of what they call it. And just wanted to add that point in. I think you went on those really, I love how you explained those, Jana. It's good to hear your perspective, and I've never heard you talk about those.
Thanks. Okay, so our eating concerns treatment team at AppState. So again, we provide specialized services for individuals, for students with eating or body image concerns. And this is for all students, part-time students included. We provide these services. We have a multidisciplinary approach because we know that that is the best approach to treatment, because eating disorders, there are various components. There are medical components, there's psychological components, there's dietary components. And so again, we have providers who in student health services who can address the medical concerns. We have a psychiatrist that some students may see. We have the mental health providers, because again, this is, these are complex mental illnesses, and often eating disorders develop as a way to manage one's anxiety or other mental health issues. And then myself as the registered dietitian, can help students normalize their eating patterns, can develop meal plans for students if that seems warranted, if one needs that, help with kind of exposure therapy, so reintroducing challenge foods or fear foods, getting to where they feel comfortable going to the grocery store again, eating at restaurants, things like that. And so when one is referred, we will assess, there will be an assessment of their eating concerns. There will be a medical evaluation in student health services, and then follow-ups with a medical provider as needed. We offer individual therapy, and that might be off campus, but often is on campus through counseling and psychological services. And then there's group therapy as well. And again, nutrition counseling with me.
I'll talk a little bit about the students that we've seen in this last year, what our data shows, and keep in mind the pandemic hit March 2020, and so these numbers would probably be even higher. But you know, students went home and things just kind of froze and stood still at that point in time. But so last year, we saw 94 students for an eating disorder consult in the school year. So an eating disorder consult for us at the counseling center is the way in which students first get evaluated to see if they're a good fit for our eating concerns treatment team. So we saw 94 individual students to evaluate the severity of an eating disorder, whether one is present, and what kind of resources that they need. Again, that number probably would have been a lot higher, and that number goes up exponentially every year too. It's crazy. We just see more and more students. I don't know if it's reduction in stigma or I'm not sure what, but people are coming to address these issues more and more each year. So of the 94 students that we evaluated, 78 of those were severe enough to be referred for our eating concerns treatment team. So generally that means that someone has eating concerns that warrant care from that multidisciplinary approach, where we see that it would be fitting for them to work with someone in student health, as well as Jana for dietary needs. So of those 78 that we referred to our eating concerns treatment team, about 30% or 23 of those technically qualified for a higher level of care. And so when we say higher level of care, what we mean is intensive outpatient or partial hospitalization, or even like residential treatment at an eating disorder treatment center somewhere. Lots of times students are not ready to go to treatment or have financial concerns, or maybe they're 3 weeks away from finishing out the school year and they really want to finish their semester. So 23 of these folks, we recognize that they need a higher level of care, and for a variety of reasons, often students don't want to go. So that said, 8 of those 23, we successfully connected to a higher level of care somewhere, which is awesome for us. We were able to kind of get them connected to treatment center off campus for what they needed to do. 13 of those resistant folks, for whatever reason, not wanting to go or unable to go, we were able to manage through our eating concerns treatment team, which is pretty awesome. And they were able to stay in school and complete the semester and stay stable or make progress on their eating disorder. So it just kind of goes to show, I think, how effective and needed we are as a treatment team. It's pretty amazing the number of students that we see each year and can help support to stay safe and healthy or get the care that they need. So who does our eating concerns treatment team serve? So we serve any student struggling with eating or body image concerns. We're also an excellent support for concerned friends or family who maybe need information or guidance on how to help a friend or how to help their son or daughter. So we're an awesome resource for consultation in that way. We also are support for our campus partners and local community partners. So sometimes we'll get phone calls from folks in residence life where a student recently passed out in the dorms and they're worried about eating concerns. And so, how do we approach the student? How do we get them connected to you all? Same thing when staff or faculty can kind of notice those things in whatever role they're interacting with students. We also sometimes will get I just had one this week where a local therapist in the community who's in private practice reached out to me about one of their clients who they're wondering how to help support them. They're worried about pretty significant eating concerns. They're wondering how to support them. So we can help consult. And if the student is an app student in that way, they can be part of our eating concerns treatment team too. So I don't think I mentioned, but our team meets once a month as a treatment team over Zoom right now because the pandemic used to be in person. And we will use that time to talk about the students that are struggling, help consult with one another, collaborate information, make treatment goals for folks that we're really worried about. And now with the opportunity of that being over Zoom, we can have folks from the local community, if they're working with an app student with an eating disorder, they can be part of that treatment team too. So those clinicians working with them. So yeah, a lot of ways that we can support people. I also want to talk a little bit about just how our treatment team functions in case you all, especially at other universities, don't have something like this in place and you're considering trying to establish an eating concerns treatment team at your university. So we have this kind of flow chart here. I mentioned our eating disorder consult. That is that first, again, point of contact where we're assessing and providing recommendations for students who are struggling with eating concerns. So how do students get to that eating disorder consult? Answer is lots of ways. There can be folks within our student athletes, our athletic staff, so trainers, or there's a dietitian that we have connection with in the athletics world who can refer students. Sometimes students will present themselves, which is always awesome. We love that self-motivation when folks will come. Other times, maybe someone is already in counseling at our center, but maybe for other issues, and they finally reveal that they're struggling with eating concerns. Or maybe the counselor is starting to have an idea that maybe eating concerns are there, and they will connect them with us for further evaluation at that ED consult. I know Jana will sometimes be working with folks for other reasons, then realize maybe there's some significant eating concerns going on, and she'll connect them to us for that initial ED consult. Same thing with Tori and her staff at Student Health. Sometimes someone will present for, dizziness or they'll present for anxiety, and during their assessment, they realize that there's likely some eating concerns going on, and they'll refer them to us at Student Counseling to do this ED consult. And then other times, because we have a lot of folks doing counseling in the local community, or other residents, life staff on campus and whatnot, people are concerned about folks and want to get them connected to us, in a variety of contexts in which they interact with students, whether it's therapists in the local community or just the other faculty and staff on campus. So we're getting students coming from a variety of ways, but eventually when they get connected to us, we'll perform this eating disorder consult. At the ED consult, that's where we kind of make some decisions about what will be most supportive for the student. So sometimes we realize that there's eating concerns. It will connect them with our eating concerns treatment team. Other times at that ED consult, we realize that someone is presenting with an eating disorder that's so severe or so concerning that we realize our treatment team is not going to be enough, that they need more, so that maybe they need this higher level of care here. So maybe we're connecting them with an eating disorder treatment center more immediately, and maybe we're helping them withdraw from school in order to make that happen, kind of depending on the severity. Or sometimes maybe someone presents to us at the eating disorder consult and we realize, as Jana was kind of describing, it's more disordered eating than an eating disorder. So maybe it's something a little bit more subclinical, we'd call it. And so maybe they do just need to get connected to Jana, but they don't need this broader eating concerns treatment team. So sometimes we're deciding that maybe a single resource might be more helpful for them. So there's a number of things we could connect them to. But oftentimes, as you can see, the 78 of the 94 that we saw, we're thinking the eating concerns treatment team is really what's most appropriate for folks. So just to talk about what's involved in our eating concerns treatment team, there's a number of things we can consider. The main staples of our treatment team are Jana and her work from the dietary perspective, as well as student health. So Tori and her trained staff, a few specific trained staff at student health who have some extra eating concerns expertise, extra eating concerns knowledge, And then the other core staple is individual counseling at our counseling center. So those are the three big ones that we think about. The other entities that we incorporate as needed are the dietitian through athletics. So if there's a student athlete who is working on performance issues and also maybe is presenting with some eating concerns, the convenience of having that athletics dietitian within like their world can be really helpful for them. And thankfully, our dietitian, Sam Mellert, has some good training and awareness about eating concerns and can help support our student athletes in that way. We'll also sometimes refer to Dr. Moritz in psychiatry, and she has some good knowledge in eating concerns as well. And at other times, if it's appropriate, we'll refer someone to our group therapy program. We have a food mood group that's kind of an eating concerns support recovery group. And so that's a good fit for folks who are kind of motivated and ready to make some change in their world. But the beauty about this is that within each of these entities, students are hearing the same messages. So maybe I'm saying, hey, I'm worried about you in counseling. Then they go see Jana and Jana says, hey, I'm worried about you and your intake. And then they go see Tori and Tori says, hey, I'm worried about you and your health status. That message over and over again from all those entities becomes so much more powerful when it's coming from so many different people and it's consistent. So it's a really helpful way to kind of help drill a message home when we're worried about someone. I want to pause there too to see if Tori or Jana want to add anything to kind of this flow and how we function as a treatment center or as a treatment team.
I'd just like to say that when people come to student health, we have wonderful providers here who are trained, specific providers, and also our nursing staff is very well trained in how to manage patients who come in. So they get blind weights and they're identified early, and they get put into a special time slot so that we can really spend the time that's needed to do the full psychological and physical evaluation for them. We have EKG, we have the lab here, we have a lot of resources within our facility that people aren't even aware of. Mm-hmm. So they do get a very full, complete evaluation.
Yeah. Did you mention the blind weights too, Tori? I think that's wonderful.
Yeah. So a blind weight is, if you don't know, is when someone, so if they're coming to us as a consult from Jana or from Ashley, that or from someone else, we identify them early, and either a nursing staff or someone up front will, and we put an alert on their chart that says blind weights only. If they have an eating disorder, we don't want them to get triggered by being weighed every time they come in, which can be a huge trigger for patients. Mm-hmm. So a blind weight is when they stand on the scale backwards and the nurse writes down their vitals and puts them in the chart without saying them out loud or announcing them to the room or even telling them. And then that we've just found that that's the best way to do things for treatment and recovery.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. Yeah, and this could be a good point where we each kind of talk about our roles a little bit more. From the counseling center side, we're talking a lot more about those emotional drivers of the eating disorder, what the eating disorder is bringing them, what it's taking from them, and helping to build some motivation to make change happen. And the food mood group is, I mean, eating disorders, they live in isolation. And so when you can have support around you and other students who get it and know what that experience is like, that group can be so powerful as well. And Jana, I know you talked about some of what you already do. You talked about exposures and grocery shopping, planning, moving away from safe foods, and you do a lot of myth busting with students, I know too. I don't know if there's other things you want to say about your role.
No, but I'm glad you brought that up, Ashley, the myth busting, because a lot of times it is people coming in, you know, and initially maybe it was just trying in their eyes to have a healthier diet. And they have heard, you know, or read online or heard from friends or various things like that, that this is bad. You know, the most common one I hear lately is, you know, carbs are bad. And even, you know, oftentimes they're coming to me because again, they want help improving their diet, or they want to lose some weight, and they're not presenting to me thinking that they have disordered eating or that they have an eating disorder, particularly if they're not being referred to me from counseling. But in talking to me, and I hear them say, you know, I eat this sometimes, but I know it's bad, or you know, I really try not to have this, and I'll pick up on those things. So again, helping them understand what is a healthy diet, what does a healthy diet really look like, and understand that carbs aren't bad, or these other things that they may believe aren't true. And we talk about, you know, where you're getting your information from, what are your sources. And again, as I said, you know, helping them with, you know, it may just be giving them some information, you know, again, like that, helping dispel some of those myths. It may be all the way to creating a meal plan for them. And I won't get too much into that, but I do that based on the exchange system, which is how it is done in intensive outpatient as well. And so I may give them a meal plan or somewhere in between that. And then, like I said, kind of introducing fear foods, you know, working with them, kind of meeting them where they are and helping them improve their intake and have an adequate amount, you know, just kind of, again, at a pace that, you know, we're seeing change and seeing progress, but also that's not going to be too overwhelming or cause them to just kind of run away and never come back and see me.
Awesome. Yeah, it's amazing, you know, all these different, how we all work together in our different roles of expertise, and all of this together is what creates success for a student. You know, they need all of these different aspects of support and conversation and education from all of us. It's just so much more effective and increases the chances of recovery and really making change. Yeah, so that's what we kind of have planned in terms of sharing some information about how we function and who we help. We'd love to open it up for questions and see if we can be helpful for what all you all want to know more about.
Welcome, everyone. We're so happy to see you all today. To start out, we'd just kind of like to talk a little bit about what expressive arts is. So something that I'd like to mention is expressive arts. We kind of focus more on process rather than product. And typically, you know, when we think of art, we might think of like one thing or another, like painting or drawing. But in this expressive arts practice, sometimes that like we'll want to incorporate multiple art forms into one session and kind of link them together. So yeah, and if you all have any questions throughout, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll be happy to answer them.
Yeah, so like Sydney was saying, just with expressive arts, we're kind of coming in from these different avenues and often integrating a lot of different avenues. So combining visual art with body movement, mindfulness, with music, whatever that may look like. I just wanted to provide a little bit of background before we dive into our activity. First, starting with the different approaches, these images are specifically related to approaches to trauma, but I think it can be helpful when we're thinking about expressive arts and kind of how we're approaching it. So one kind of mode would be the top-down approach. And so for a lot of us, we're really cognitive, especially if we're in this academic setting. So we may start with what's going on in that prefrontal cortex part of the brain, the thinking, the decision-making, words, logic. And then after starting there, maybe moving into some of that artistic expression, maybe tuning more into the emotions, into memories, things like that in the midbrain. And then finally, after moving through those pieces, approaching more of that reptilian brain, our body awareness, you know, tuning into some of those maybe fight or flight responses, those really automatic survival modes. So today, just to give you kind of an idea of what we're going to be doing, we're taking more of this bottom-up approach. So that means that we'll be starting more with that body awareness through a guided meditation and tuning into the breath. And then next stepping up, moving into more of that artistic expression with an exercise. And then finally adding in those words. So these are approaches that both have their kind of unique ways of helping us kind of integrate all these different parts of our brain. So I'm going to stop share. And I would like to offer the first part of our activity to be a guided meditation. So I invite you to find a comfortable position. You can turn off your screen if that feels more comfortable to you. Just allowing yourself to get comfortable, that may be sitting down. If you prefer to change positions and lie down, that's an option for you as well. Just let yourself close your eyes, or maybe just allow them to lose focus, zoning out on a specific point in front of you. Giving your eyes a bit of a break from all the wonderful lectures from today. And giving yourself an opportunity to tune inward. Maybe taking any final movements or adjustments that allow you to feel really comfortable and settled in this space. I invite you to bring awareness to any points of contact, maybe where your feet meet the earth, maybe where your seat meets the chair beneath you, hands resting upon the thighs. Just notice what it's like to feel supported, allowing yourself to feel grounded. Just breathing into that space, sinking a little bit deeper. Building up from that connection to the ground, allowing your spine to stretch tall, maybe letting your shoulders drop away from your ears, crown reaching towards the sky. Maybe notice any tension you may be holding in your face, and just giving it permission to relax at the jaw, at the brow. And in this space you've created for yourself, just allowing yourself to breathe in, maybe taking a deep inhale through the nose, filling up down into the belly, expanding into the chest, all the way to the top of the head. Maybe exhaling with a little bit of a sigh, just sinking deeper. And for the next few breaths, I invite you to notice a certain point of your breath. So maybe that is the expansion and contraction of the belly. Maybe it's the air as it moves in and out of your nostrils. Choose that single point to focus your awareness for a few breaths. And if your mind wanders, just bringing back that attention, if you're able, to the point that you've chosen to focus on. Now, as you may feel perhaps more connected with your body, with this breath, life force that's moving within you, take a moment to think about what has allowed you to be here today. This year has been a challenging year on a community level, on an individual level. And it's no small thing that you're here today. So think about what it is that has allowed you to be here today, to show up. Maybe it's a friend, maybe it is a self-care routine that you've started. Maybe it's a motto from a family member or friend. It's okay if nothing specific comes up, but I encourage you to see if you can tap into a feeling of gratitude, a feeling of strength for being here today, for persevering. And just noticing what that feels like in your body as you allow that to wash over you. Really letting yourself soak in that gratitude and that sense of strength, maybe a sense of pride. And after sitting with that for a few breaths, just bringing yourself back more into this present moment. Maybe deepening that breath with an inhale through the nose. Exhaling out with a bit of a sigh. Perhaps bringing some movement back into your fingers and toes, just getting yourself back into this more physical space. I encourage you to take any stretches that may feel good, maybe lifting your arms up to the sky, maybe taking a twist. When you feel ready, letting your gaze look up, just taking in your surroundings. As you come back to this moment we're together. And eventually rejoining us on the Zoom screen. Thank you all for participating in that. And Sydney is going to shift us into the next part of our exercise.
Thank you, Fiona. That was lovely.
Oh, you're muted.
I muted myself again. I hope you all are ready to make some art now. I'd like to invite you to get out some paper, pencils, whatever you have laying around today you'd like to use. And then once you're ready, just take a minute and think about what was in the meditation and think about the strengths from this year. It's been a wild one. Think about the things that have brought you through, and we'd like to invite you to create a symbol of the strength and resilience, something to carry with you throughout the day or to reflect on when we think about this year and the things that have brought us through. Do about 10 minutes or so. And if you start this and you're like getting into it and we run out of time, you're always welcome to keep working on it later.
The sun and birds, and then I wrote the words out. So the words were calm, freedom, joy, energy, uplifting, and acceptance. And what I've noticed in this period of time since the pandemic started and a lot of social unrest is that the sun has been really calming for me, and being able to be out in the sun has helped to reduce some anxiety. I personally don't really like birds, but I like them from afar. And so when I'm in the sun or on the balcony and just seeing birds, just kind of brings me back to a place of feeling more steady, and also just admiring the way that they navigate life, which is, from my vantage point, with a lot of freedom. So just wanted to share that. And even today, like feeling a lot of anxiety about the Collegiate Recovery Summit, and I didn't even introduce myself, so I'll do that at the end. But when I looked down at this picture, I just had a smile on my face. Like, it made me feel better, like I could take a deep breath. So I appreciated it.
Thank you.
Yeah, it's interesting to hear these themes of heart as well as animal connections as well. Those are a couple of things that really stood out to me, as well as that sense of freedom, I guess, that can come from being aware of the processes that you're involved in. Yeah, thank you all for sharing. Might have time for one more if anyone is dying to go. If not, I know Sydney has a little way for us to close.
All right. Well, what I'd like to invite you to do today for the closing is kind of think about, one word that maybe stood out to you as you were creating today, doing the meditation, or even reflecting. Something that you're feeling that you might feel called to type into the chat. And so if we could all just get ready to type on the count of 3, once we've got our words, we can send it in there at once, and then we'll kind of go through that together. So, go. Okay. All right. Okay. Everyone sent in the word that they'd like to share today. We'll just read it off. Breathe, breathe, glowing, hopeful, connection, expression, smile, threaded together, happiness, understanding. All right, beautiful. Thank you all so much for coming today.
Yes, thank you. And I'm just going to do a brief closing for the entire summit so that we can kind of end and tie some things together. But again, I did not introduce myself. So I'm Kiana Haynes. I'm the coordinator for the Appalachian State University Collegiate Recovery Community. I'm also a substance misuse counselor in wellness and prevention services and do multicultural outreach within our AppState community. And we will be sending out at the end of this, again, a post survey. So we can get your honest feedback. It will be anonymous. And along with that, I'll include some more information about our actual AppState CRC that we weren't able to dig into today. So to end, I wanted to come back to some things that Ben Asma discussed in our summit introduction. So if you missed that, I can give a brief synopsis, but we'll also be posting that to our social media probably in a week or 2. So Ben discussed the insidious nature of trauma and its impacts on addiction. He discussed the struggles that individuals managing addiction face. He discussed the importance of treating our students and anyone working through addiction and recovery as human beings, where we are seeing their humanness foundationally. He also discussed the limitations that reduced access to resources can place on those in need, especially during a pandemic. We hope that the lessons you learned through engaging with our wonderful presenters today allow you to further reinforce the human being in everyone, the need to be allies, the importance that access to inclusive resources plays, as well as what is our role in making sure that we are seen as inclusive and that we are actually doing the work and not just saying it, and the role of our community in health and healing. Thank you all for attending this 3rd annual Recovery Summit. Recovery includes us all in recognizing recovery. If you're interested in more information, like I said, we will be sending that out in an email, and you can always reach out to our AppState CRC staff. And so you can find our information on wellness.appstate.edu. And we hope that you all have a wonderful day, that you have a good weekend, and we appreciate you being in space with us. And thank you to our presenters.